Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Romeo and Juliet. In this video we are going to be looking at Act 2 Scene 3, which is the scene where we meet Friar Lawrence for the first time. Cracking scene, not too long, full of foreshadowing. So let's get started.
Quick plot summary for you. The scene begins with a brand new character. His name is Friar Lawrence and he's alone in his cell. And what he's doing is he's got a little basket and he's collecting herbs and flowers that he's going to use to make sort of medicines with. And in a soliloquy, because he's alone on stage speaking out his thoughts, that's what soliloquy is, he talks about the sort of power of nature, but also the danger, how herbs can be used to save and treat, but how they can also be used to poison and to kill. It's a speech that is absolutely full of antithesis and oppositions, which are really, really important to this play. At the end of his soliloquy, who appears but Romeo? And Romeo is quite clearly wearing the clothes from the night before. And so Friar Lawrence tells him off. You can see straight off that they've got a really strong relationship, almost a kind of father-son relationship, really, the way that Romeo goes to him for advice and listens to what he says, and actually the way that the friar can sort of chastise him in a gentle way. So the friar sort of has a little bit of a go at him and it's like, what have you been doing? You've obviously not been in bed. Were you with Rosaline? And he's really annoyed about the idea that maybe Romeo was with Rosaline. And so then Romeo's like, no, I've met somebody new. And he starts to talk about his sort of feelings of love for Juliet and how he wants the friar to help him. And the friar is like, you fickle pickle, i.e. you've only just been talking to me about how you're in love with Rosaline. Now suddenly you're in love with another woman. Like, how on earth can this be okay? However, he does also recognise that if he is to help Romeo, he's got a shot of solving some of the problems in the city, i.e. he's like, hang on a minute, if I can get the two of you together and the parents are on board, this is going to sort out the feud. So we understand why the friar is going to get himself involved. Otherwise, it would be a bit dodge, getting yourself involved in marrying two people against the wishes of their families. But the overarching premise behind it for the friar is to bring peace around. So here's a little section from his soliloquy. I told you that there's this kind of focus on oppositions. Even the way that it begins with the grey-eyed morn smiles on the frowning night. We started with antithesis, opposing things at either side of a balanced structure. So imagine now, if you would, the friar in his cell collecting his flowers, and then he picks upon this particular one and he says, within the infant rind of this small flower poison hath residence and medicine power. So again, another opposition, another juxtaposition. We've got the difference between the infant rind and small, so young and petite, little, so seeming insignificant, but actually poison hath residence and medicine power. So it's this idea of something quite small and insignificant having major power. Well, that's going to come in handy later. For this being smelt, with that part cheers each part, but being tasted slays all senses with the heart. So we've got this lovely sensory description. And again, funnily enough, and a kind of opposing idea, because he's basically saying when you smell the flower, it will give you great joy. You know, it will make you feel better because it smells good. But if you ate it, if you tasted it, it would slay all senses with the heart. Note the way that the sibilance there is like emphasizing the word slays, which essentially means destroy, kill. So it's very, very emotive. So slays all senses with the heart. Bit of personification there as well. So smells great, kills you if you eat it. Two such opposed kings encamp them still in man as well as herbs, grace and rude will. we've got this really cool metaphor here. Sorry, phone just pinged. We've got this really cool metaphor here of these two kings, these opposing kings, one of grace and one of will, and how they are combined in both man and herbs. So he's comparing these herbs, these properties to mankind, and it's really true, because he's basically saying we've all got two sides inside of us, but if that darker side takes over, well then, where the worser is predominant, full soon the canker death eats up that plant. So he's basically saying if you give into that darker side, then like a plant, you will get completely eaten up. Canker is a disease. The canker death, disease death, eats up that plant. So it's a little bit of a warning here about giving in to those sort of darker temptations. And of course, this is major foreshadowing, like big siren foreshadowing, because of course, sorry if plot spoiler, it is a potion that brings their tragic fate to fruition, isn't it? Because it's all to do with this Juliet taking this potion that makes her seem dead. Romeo also poisons himself. So this is a major moment of foreshadowing, and it reminds us again excuse me, of the prologue and the fact that we know that we are hurtling towards their end. Okay, so a little bit again now on the relationship between Romeo and the friar. So this is what he says to Romeo when he arrives, and this is introducing the theme of age versus youth, the idea of wisdom, who has the wisdom. He's talking about sleep here. He says, care keeps his watch in every old man's eye, and where care lodges, sleep will never lie. But where unbruised youth with unstuffed brain doth couch his limbs, there golden sleep doth reign. So he's basically saying the old and wise have brains that are just full of like thoughts and ideas, which means that they don't sleep. Whereas unbruised youth, lovely metaphor there, so i.e. young people don't have anything to be worried or upset about. They've also got an unstuffed brain, also a brilliant metaphor. Not true. Your brains are stuffed full of brilliant things. This is what the friar says. But he's basically saying that young people can sleep because they don't have things weighing upon them, don't have things troubling them. How wrong he is, bearing in mind what happens in the rest of the play. But he's saying it as a reason, like as in to justify his suspicions about Romeo. He's like, you should be asleep, fast asleep. It's early in the morning. You've been up all night. Okay, so that's why he says, therefore thy earliest doth me assure thou art uproused by some distemperature, or if not so, then here I hit it right. Our Romeo hath not been in bed tonight. So that's going to be quite shocking, isn't it? But it's setting him up as this kind of almost paternal figure, which is continued here with the absolute scolding that Romeo gets in this moment. So first off, uses an exclamative. Holy St. Francis, what a change is here! Okay, so it shows his shock and disbelief that Romeo has again changed his mind and is now pledging his love for somebody else. He asks through this rhetorical question, is Rosaline, whom thou didst love so dear, so soon forsaken? Forsaken means abandoned. So he's making the point that Romeo's feelings seem like overly changeable, and I think that the choice of forsaken suggests almost like a carelessness to Romeo, like, oh, you love her one day, then abandoned the next. He says young men's love then lies not truly in their hearts but in their eyes. Jesu Maria, what a deal of brine hath washed thy sallow cheeks for Rosaline. So the friar is bang on here in terms of what he's saying about Romeo. He's like, your love didn't come from the heart. It was all up here. It was all just attraction. It was all just lust. That's what he's saying in this metaphor. And then we've got another metaphor here, another exclamative, where he's like, whoa, all of the crying that you did over Rosaline. So he's drawing attention to that past behaviour. I cut out a little bit of the scene. It continues in that vein. And again, in terms of this understanding that the friar has of Romeo's character, it's quite clear. So when Romeo says, you know, thou chidest me off for loving Rosaline, so you were always telling me off for loving her, so like, why aren't you happy that I'm over it? Friar Lawrence says, yeah, for doting, not for loving. Pupil mine. I like the pupil mine. It feels quite loving. But he's making the point that it wasn't love. If you dote on someone, it means you kind of worship them, you adore them, but it's not love. The metaphor is a little bit unfortunate. Romeo said, and badest me bury love. And then Friar Lawrence extends the metaphor, not in a grave to lay one in, another out to have. That's quite gross. He's basically suggesting that he's sort of like swapping bodies in and out of a grave. But obviously that's quite dramatic in terms of the foreshadowing there as well. Excuse me. Because of course that is exactly where their love ends up being buried. Romeo tries to defend himself here against Friar Lawrence's tell-off by pointing out that his love for Juliet is different. He says, I pray thee chide not. She who I love now doth grace for grace and love for love allow. The other did not so. So that repetition there, grace for grace and love for love, is a reminder of that kind of unity and equality, that balance between Juliet and Romeo, i.e. it's requited. She loves him just as much as he loves her. Whereas Rosaline obviously did not. So therefore, the other did not. So no, how she's not even named now. She's just like, the other. And Friar Lawrence picks this up. So the she, that pronoun there, is in reference to Rosaline, not Juliet. And he says, oh, she knew well thy love did read by rote and could not spell. And so he's pointing out there that Rosaline knew that Romeo's love wasn't real. The metaphor about reading by rote, even though you can't spell, it's like everything you said comes out of a book, but you couldn't even get that right. It suggests that there was falsity. Do you know what I mean? Imagine someone just using really like cheesy chat up lines. That's kind of reading. Love did read by rote and could not spell. So you're saying the right things, but it doesn't come across well. So he's actually saying here, Rosaline knew that about you, so of course she wasn't going to love you back. But there is a little shift, because he says, come young waverer, waverer, good word, come go with me, in one respect I'll thy assistant be. For this alliance may so happy prove to turn your household's rancour to pure love. Okay, so we've got another opposition, another bit of juxtaposition. So he realises in this moment that despite feeling quite critical of Romeo's behaviour, actually something good can come of this. That he can turn the household's rancour, okay, to pure love. So all of that bitterness, all of that anger will convert into love, and the purest of love indeed. So this explains Friar Lawrence's motivations for helping Romeo and what otherwise is a bit of a bonkers plan. And then our last little bit of advice, spectacular foreshadowing here. Friar Lawrence says, wisely and slow they stumble that run fast. So wisely and slow, so an adverb and an adjective are all about pace, about being careful, about being measured. Sounds a little bit like Juliet, warning, well, this is too rash, too sudden, too unadvised, too like the lightning. So he's saying, keep calm, slow down, and then he qualifies what he means in this metaphor. They stumble that run fast. Stumble being a metaphor, falling down, getting in trouble. So if you go too quickly, things are going to fail. Instead, go slowly. And again, what a stonking bit of foreshadowing in this scene, because actually, had they been able to be measured, everything would have gone well. What causes, or part of the cause of their tragic demise, is because they are forced to act quickly and hatch crazy plans. So again, Shakespeare is doing a little bit of foreshadowing here in this moment. Okay, last point. So what's this scene important for? Age versus youth and wisdom. 100%. Friar Lawrence positions himself as almost like the father figure, certainly the teacher, certainly the wise, and Romeo represents the sort of youthful, slightly, he's kind of like a little puppy, bouncing around him, asking him for help. We've got the kind of concept of oppositions that runs through this whole play. Like if you just think about the notion of love and hate, that love versus conflict, that is in almost every single scene, and those oppositions are dealt with so well by Friar Lawrence and the antithesis he used and the juxtaposition. We're reminded about the power of nature, yeah, and the kind of inevitability, fate. Once more, all of that foreshadowing, it's all about reminding us of fate and the inevitability of these actions. But in this case, they're tied to this very specific thing, which is the power of nature, because we're seeing this herbs, these flowers being used in a way that can either create goodness or create darkness. And of course, that is what happens later on. Clever Shakespeare, he knew what he was doing. That's it from me. I shall just say thank you so much for watching, and as always, just remind you that you can subscribe and then you can find out when more videos are coming. Check out my playlists for other GCSE and A-level texts, as well as skills-based material as well. Okay, thanks so much again. Happy revising.